5 years had passed since the war with the Cartho ended. 5 years had passed since humanity proved to the galaxy that true strength came from sacrifice and principle, rather than raw power. The galaxy had changed dramatically during this time, and the changes continued to accelerate. Humanity's influence spread not through conquest, but through the simple example of how to live with honor and courage. Captain Jake Morrison had retired from active military service and had taken a position as the director of the Galactic Guardian Academy. This was a new institution created to train soldiers and defenders from all species. The academy was located on a space station that orbited Earth, giving the facility a perfect symbol of what it represented. It brought together beings from across the galaxy and taught them that protecting others was the most noble calling any individual could pursue. The academy was a remarkable place. In one training room, human cadets practiced combat techniques alongside Vex engineers who were learning tactical thinking. In another room, Zenithian philosophers taught courses on ethics and decision-making to young Corvians. Cartho warriors, who had once seen all other species as inferior, were now learning the principles of protective service from human instructors. One particular student at the academy was named Kesver, a young Corvian who was the grandson of Kes, the merchant who had studied human history and become convinced of humanity's value. Kesver had grown up learning about humans from his family. He had been told stories about how humans had sacrificed themselves in battle, and how they had changed an entire civilization through their principles. Kesver had come to the academy because he wanted to understand these principles for himself. Jake Morrison spent time training Kesver personally. One afternoon they were walking through the academy's observation deck, which looked out at the stars surrounding Earth. Jake asked Kesver what had brought him to the academy. Kesver explained that his family had told him that humans were different from other species. He said that humans seemed to value things that did not make logical sense from a profit perspective. He wanted to understand why. Jake smiled and told Kesver a story. He said that many years ago, humans had lived on a single planet without any knowledge of the rest of the galaxy. During that time, humans had often acted selfishly, just like many other species did. But humans had also developed stories, philosophies, and beliefs that celebrated sacrifice and courage. These ideas had been passed down through countless generations. When humans finally joined the galactic community, these values came with them. Jake explained that humans had learned through their own history that civilizations survived longer and became stronger when people cared for each other. Humans had discovered through bitter experience that societies built on exploitation and greed eventually collapsed. So humans had developed a culture that valued compassion and mutual protection. When humans came to the galaxy, they simply brought those values with them. Kesver listened carefully. He said that this made sense from a long-term survival perspective, but he asked why humans would apply these principles to other species. Why would humans sacrifice for Corvians or Vex or Zenithians who had originally mocked them? Jake told Kesver that this was the deepest principle of all. Jake said that humans believed all conscious life had value. Humans believed that all beings deserved protection and respect, regardless of whether those beings had shown humans kindness in return. In another part of the galaxy, something important was happening on a Zenithian research station. The Zenithians had been studying human biology and human neurology for the past 5 years. They had wanted to understand what made humans think and act so differently from other advanced species. The lead researcher was a Zenithian named Fëanor, who had been assigned to study the nature of human compassion. Fëanor had discovered something remarkable. The human brain was actually less efficient in many ways than the brains of more advanced species. But the human brain had developed unique pathways for processing emotion and empathy. Humans could feel the suffering of others intensely. Humans could imagine themselves in another being's situation and feel what that being might feel. This capacity for empathy was not a weakness. It was actually a profound strength. Fëanor published a paper about these findings. The paper spread throughout the galaxy and was studied in universities on dozens of different worlds. Scientists from many species began conducting their own research into the nature of human emotion and empathy. They discovered that most advanced species had actually lost the ability to feel deep empathy during their evolution. As their brains became more powerful and more logical, they had sacrificed their emotional connections to other beings. Humans, being younger as a species, had not yet evolved past their emotional nature. In fact, humans had developed their emotional capacity even further. Humans could feel empathy not just for their own species, but for any conscious being. This made humans unique in the galaxy. This made humans, in a strange way, more advanced than species that had far superior technology. Meanwhile, on the planet Corva, the Corvian Merchant Society was undergoing a complete transformation. Young Cass had become one of the most respected leaders among her people. She had spent the past 5 years reorganizing Corvian business to follow human principles of fair dealing and mutual benefit. Corvian traders now offered reasonable prices to smaller civilizations. Corvian companies no longer exploited workers from less advanced species. Some older Corvians had resisted these changes. They argued that profit margins were decreasing. They said that the Corvian Merchant Society was becoming weaker. But they were proven wrong. By treating other species fairly and building relationships based on trust rather than exploitation, the Corvian economy actually became stronger. More species wanted to trade with Corvians because Corvians could be trusted. More civilizations wanted to form alliances with Corvians because they knew they would be treated with respect. The transformation of Corvian society inspired changes in other civilizations as well. The Vex began reforming their industrial practices. The Morpheus Collective changed their governmental structures to give more power to smaller member states. The Zenithians began sharing their ancient knowledge more freely with younger species, instead of guarding it carefully. Throughout the galaxy, a new culture was emerging. This new culture was based on the principles that humanity had demonstrated through action. The new culture valued courage and sacrifice. It respected beings from all civilizations equally. It understood that true strength came from protecting others and standing by principles even when it was difficult. On Earth, in the city where Captain Jake Morrison lived, a monument was being constructed. The monument was dedicated to all the humans who had sacrificed themselves during the war with the Cartho and during the peacekeeping operations that followed. But the monument also represented something more. It represented humanity's commitment to protecting all life in the galaxy. The monument showed a human figure standing between a smaller being and a threat. The sculpture was designed to look like it could be any human protecting any other species. The inscription on the monument read, "We stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. We protect not because we are forced to, but because all life has value. We choose courage. We choose principle. We choose to be better." A ceremony was planned for the dedication of the monument. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy had been invited to attend. Captain Jake Morrison was asked to say a few words at the ceremony. He spent days thinking about what he wanted to say. On the day of the dedication, thousands of people gathered at the monument. There were humans, Vex, Corvians, Zenithians, Cartho, Morpheus Collective members, and dozens of other species. They all stood together looking at the monument that celebrated human sacrifice and human principle. Jake Morrison stood before the crowd and began to speak. He said that 5 years ago, humans had been the joke of the galactic community. He said that other species had laughed at human weakness and limitation. But Jake said that what those species had seen as weakness was actually humanity's greatest strength. Humans had survived through cooperation and sacrifice. Humans had learned that principle and honor were worth any personal cost. Jake told the assembled crowd that the monument was not really about humans. It was about all of them. It was about the choice that every being could make to stand up for others, to protect those who were vulnerable, and to never abandon principle no matter how difficult circumstances became. Jake said that the galaxy was changing because beings from all species were making this choice. He said that together, all civilizations could build something greater than any single species could ever build alone. As Jake finished speaking, the entire crowd fell silent. Then slowly applause began. It started with the humans, but quickly spread to every other species present. The Cartho warriors clapped their massive hands together. The Vex emitted sounds of approval through their communication systems. The Zenithians glowed brighter with their crystalline light. All of them were united in the understanding that humanity had given the galaxy something precious, a new vision of what strength could be. The war with the Cartho ended not with a single decisive battle, but with a gradual shift in momentum and will. The Cartho realized that they were fighting an enemy that they could not understand or defeat. Their weapons were powerful, but humans and the other galactic species kept fighting anyway. Their strategies had always worked before because previous enemies had always retreated when the cost of fighting became too high. But this enemy did not retreat. This enemy protected others even when the cost was their own lives. The Cartho commanders understood something that their society had never accepted before. They realized that the humans and their allies would never surrender because they were fighting for something more important than survival. They were fighting for principle. The Cartho, who had always fought only for conquest and domination, could not compete with an enemy motivated by something they did not understand. After months of continuous fighting, the Cartho commander finally sent a message requesting peace negotiations. The request was transmitted to the Galactic Council. For the first time in the history of their conflict with the Cartho, peace seemed possible. Delegations from multiple species, including humans, met at a neutral location in space to discuss terms. Captain Jake Morrison represented humanity at the peace negotiations. He sat across from the Cartho commander, a massive being with scales and eyes that glowed with an intensity that showed the warrior nature of his kind. The Cartho commander studied Jake carefully, trying to understand what made humans so different from every other species he had encountered. The negotiations were long and difficult. The Cartho wanted to return to their previous territories. Other species wanted guarantees that the Cartho would not attack again. Jake listened to both sides and proposed something new. He suggested that the peace agreement should include protections not just for the powerful civilizations, but for all the species that the Cartho had threatened. The Cartho commander was surprised by this suggestion. Jake explained that lasting peace required that everyone be protected, not just the strong. He said that if only powerful civilizations were protected, smaller species would always live in fear. Jake proposed that all species, regardless of their military strength, would receive the same level of protection under the peace agreement. The negotiations eventually produced a peace treaty that satisfied all parties. The Cartho agreed to respect the boundaries of other species. Multiple species agreed to protect each other if the Cartho or any other aggressive force tried to attack again. The treaty was not perfect, but it represented something new in galactic history. It represented the idea that all life had value and deserved protection. In the weeks following the peace agreement, something remarkable happened in the Galactic Council. The members began asking a question that they had never seriously considered before. They asked what would happen if they modeled their own actions and policies on human principles. They asked if they could build a galactic society based on mutual protection and shared values, instead of cynical calculations and political maneuvering. The VEX representative, Coordinator Velthas, proposed a revolutionary new policy. He suggested that trade agreements should be restructured to give better terms to smaller civilizations. The current system benefited only the largest and most powerful species. Velthas argued that if all species had fair opportunities to succeed, everyone would benefit. The proposal was controversial, but it eventually passed with support from many council members. The Zenithian philosopher, Xandor, who had once compared humans to children, proposed something even more radical. He suggested that human philosophy courses should become mandatory in academies throughout the galaxy. Xandor said that humans had discovered truths about courage, sacrifice, and compassion that more advanced civilizations had forgotten. He argued that the younger generation of all species needed to learn these lessons. The Corvian merchants, who had once seen humanity as nothing more than cheap labor, completely reorganized their business practices. Young Kess, who had studied human history and become convinced of humanity's value, convinced the entire Corvian merchant society to change how they did business. The Corvians began investing heavily in human education and cultural programs. They hired human consultants to help them understand principles of fair dealing and mutual respect. The Morpheus Collective, whose delegate had laughed so harshly at Jake Morrison's first presentation to the council, proposed that humans should receive a special honor from the galactic community. Chancellor Morphus stood before the council and admitted that he had been wrong about humanity. He said that he had underestimated humans because he had not understood what true strength was. He proposed that humans be recognized as the guardians of the outer realms. The proposal passed unanimously. For the first time in galactic history, a single species was given a special role and responsibility. Humans were named as the primary defenders of the contested regions of space. But the title meant something very different than what it might have meant in previous times. It did not mean that humans would conquer these territories. It meant that whenever any species in these regions was in danger, humans would answer the call. Captain Jake Morrison received the news about the honor aboard the human command ship. He was standing with Lieutenant Emma Walsh and Commander Victor Hayes. They were looking at star maps showing all the territories they would now be responsible for protecting. Emma said that the assignment was enormous. The territory was vast, and there were countless small civilizations that would need protection. Jake smiled and said that this was exactly what they had been working toward. He said that humans had proven something important to the galaxy. He said that strength was not about dominating others or accumulating power. Strength was about using whatever abilities you had to protect those who could not protect themselves. A new generation of human pilots and soldiers began training, alongside young aliens from dozens of different species. In military academies across human space, Vex engineers worked alongside human technicians. Corvian tacticians studied strategy with human commanders. Zenithian philosophers discussed ethics with human soldiers. These young individuals were learning that strength came in many forms, and that humans possessed a unique strength that had been invisible to the galaxy at first. The young aliens were learning that human strength was the strength of caring for others. They were learning that humans would sacrifice their own comfort and safety for people they did not even know. They were learning that humans would fight for principle even when victory seemed impossible. The final scene took place many years later. Captain Jake Morrison, now older with gray in his hair, stood with Ambassador Lisa Douglas in the Galactic Council chamber. The chamber looked different than it had before. The seating arrangements had changed. Species of all sizes and power levels now had equal representation. The cynical calculations that had once dominated council meetings had been replaced by discussions of mutual benefit and shared protection. Ambassador Douglas was about to make a speech. She was going to propose new policies about how the galaxy would handle conflicts between different species. Her proposals would have been rejected immediately years ago. Now they were likely to pass because the galaxy had learned from human example. Jake and Lisa looked at each other with the same understanding they had shared at the beginning of their journey together. They had not just won a war. They had changed what the galaxy believed was important. They had shown that compassion and sacrifice were not weaknesses. They had proven that protecting others was not a liability. They had demonstrated that the greatest strength could come from the simplest principle, choosing to care. The joke about humans was over. Humanity had not become a threat through weapons or conquest or domination. Humans had become a galactic necessity through their unwillingness to abandon principle. They had proven that the universe was large enough for many kinds of strength, and that sometimes the greatest power came from simply choosing to be better than your circumstances demanded. The galaxy would never be the same again. The crisis came suddenly and without warning. Deep space sensors throughout the galaxy detected something alarming. The Cartho had changed their strategy. Instead of launching scattered raids against individual colonies and military outposts, they were organizing a massive coordinated assault across multiple sectors of space. This was not a limited attack. This was a final push for total territorial dominance. The Cartho had decided to conquer the entire region or die trying. The Cartho fleet divided itself into 17 separate attack forces. Each force targeted multiple locations simultaneously. Some forces attacked colony worlds where civilians lived. Other forces struck at military installations and defense stations. The attacks were coordinated so perfectly that no single civilization could respond effectively. By the time one species sent reinforcements to defend one location, the Cartho had already destroyed it and moved on to the next target. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The conference chamber was filled with panic and confusion. Council members shouted at each other, each one demanding that other species send military support to defend their territories. But the Council quickly realized that no species had enough military power to defend everything that was under attack. A choice had to be made. The Council members began calculating which territories they could afford to lose and which were worth defending. The Morpheus Collective delegate said that his species could only defend 3 of their territories. They would have to abandon the others. The Vex coordinator said something similar. The Zenithians, despite their long existence, did not have enough military forces to protect all their worlds. The Corvian merchants began calculating the financial losses they would suffer if their trading stations were destroyed. The atmosphere in the chamber became dark and hopeless. Everyone understood that many civilizations would suffer great losses before this war ended. Captain Jake Morrison was in a strategic command center when news of the massive Cartho assault reached human forces. The command center was filled with screens showing battle situations across dozens of locations. Red markers indicated places where Cartho forces were attacking. The situation was overwhelming. The Cartho seemed to be everywhere at once. Jake called an emergency meeting with his senior commanders. Lieutenant Emma Walsh was present, along with Commander Victor Hayes and pilot Daniel Cooper. Daniel was a young man with blonde hair and intense green eyes. He was one of the best pilots in the human fleet, known for his incredible reflexes and his willingness to fly impossible missions. Jake told his commanders that humanity had to do something different. He said that the Cartho were attacking in a coordinated way, specifically to overwhelm the galactic defenses through sheer numbers and simultaneous strikes. The natural response would be for each species to defend only their own territories. But Jake had a different idea. Emma Walsh listened carefully as Jake explained his plan. He said that humans should spread their forces thin, positioning human ships and soldiers not just in the areas that were important to humanity, but throughout all the contested space. When the Cartho attacked, humans would fight wherever they were needed most, not where it was most convenient for humanity. The commanders looked at Jake with expressions of shock. Victor Hayes said that this strategy was mathematically inefficient. It would leave human colonies vulnerable. It would mean spreading limited human resources across such a wide area that humans could not protect themselves properly. Emma ran quick calculations on the tactical displays. She confirmed that from a purely strategic standpoint, this plan made no sense. But then Daniel Cooper understood what Jake was really saying. Daniel spoke up and said that the strategy was not about human survival. It was about something else entirely. It was about principle. Jake nodded and confirmed Daniel's understanding. Humanity would position itself to protect all life, even at great risk to human life. Jake returned to the Galactic Council and announced humanity's new strategy. He told the Council that humans would spread throughout the contested space. Whenever and wherever the Cartho attacked, humans would be there to defend. Human ships would fly to the locations that needed help most, even if it meant leaving human colonies less defended. The Council members were astonished by this announcement. They did not understand why humans would take such enormous risks. They did not comprehend the logic of a species that would prioritize protecting others over protecting themselves. But they were also grateful. If humans were willing to be spread across so much space, it would at least give other species a better chance of survival. The Cartho assault intensified. Attack after attack struck across multiple sectors, and every time the Cartho attacked, they found human ships and soldiers waiting for them, not because humans had predicted the attacks perfectly, but because humans had simply placed themselves everywhere. The Cartho could not attack any location without encountering human defenders. Slowly, the nature of the war began to change. The Cartho had expected to overwhelm the galactic defenses through coordinated simultaneous attacks. But they had not expected to face an enemy that did not retreat, and did not retreat to defend only its own interests. The Cartho had never encountered an enemy that fought for something they did not understand. A pivotal engagement occurred when pilot Daniel Cooper's fighter encountered a massive Cartho command vessel. The command vessel was escorted by dozens of smaller warships. Daniel's fighter was alone. From any logical perspective, the situation was completely hopeless. Daniel had no chance of surviving, let alone accomplishing anything meaningful. But Daniel understood what needed to happen. He knew that the command vessel was coordinating attacks across an entire sector of space. If the command vessel could be disabled, thousands of lives could be saved. Daniel flew directly toward the command vessel, knowing that he was flying toward almost certain death. Emma Walsh, monitoring the battle from the human command center, understood immediately what Daniel was attempting to do. She sent a message to Daniel asking him to confirm his intentions. Daniel's response was calm and clear. He said that he knew what he was doing. He said that sometimes a single action could save many lives, and that was worth any personal cost. Daniel's fighter fired weapons designed to disable systems rather than destroy them completely. The Cartho command vessel's powerful defensive systems opened fire with everything they had. Energy blasts surrounded Daniel's small fighter from all directions. One blast struck Daniel's engine. His fighter began to lose power and control. But Daniel's final action was to record a message before his communication systems failed. The message would be broadcast throughout the entire galaxy. Daniel spoke calmly and clearly. He said that humans were not weak creatures. Humans had been told that they were inferior, that they were jokes, that they should not be taken seriously. He said that today they would prove something different. Daniel's message continued. He said that strength was not just about firepower or ancient technology. Strength was about standing up when standing was difficult. Strength was about protecting others even when it cost everything. He said that humans would never abandon principle, no matter how difficult or how costly that principle became. As Daniel finished his message, his fighter collided with the Cartho command vessel. The impact disabled the massive ship's engines and primary systems. The command vessel began to drift helplessly through space. But Daniel's sacrifice had accomplished something more important than just disabling one ship. His message had spread throughout the galaxy. Every species that received Daniel's message understood something fundamental about humanity. They understood that humans were not conquerors seeking power. They were not tyrants trying to dominate others. They were creatures that had chosen to become guardians. They would protect the galaxy not because they were forced to, but because it was the right thing to do. The revelation of human nature transformed the war. Inspired by Daniel's sacrifice and his words, the other species began fighting with renewed determination. They began protecting each other, not just their own territories. The Cartho, who fought only for conquest and domination, found themselves facing an enemy that fought for something they could never understand. Slowly, the tide of the war turned against the Cartho. News of the human victory spread quickly through the galaxy. Radio signals carried the story across thousands of light years. The Cartho had been defeated. A small human fleet had faced a much larger Cartho force and had won. The story seemed impossible, but it was true. Within weeks, every major civilization in the galaxy had heard about what humans had accomplished in the contested zone. The Galactic Council called another emergency meeting. This time, the tone in the chamber was very different from before. The council members who had laughed at Captain Jake Morrison now spoke with cautious respect. Even Coordinator Velthus of the Vex seemed less certain about his previous statements regarding human weakness. The council members looked at each other with expressions of confusion and concern. Something unexpected had happened, and they were not sure how to respond. Over the following months, the Cartho continued to launch attacks in the contested zone. But each time they attacked, they encountered human forces. And each time they faced humans, the results were the same. The humans did not just defend themselves. They pushed back harder. They learned from every encounter. They developed new strategies and tactics that no other species had ever considered. The humans also began doing something that surprised every civilization in the galaxy. When other species faced emergencies or crises, humans answered the call. A Zenithian research station detected a massive asteroid heading directly toward it. The station could not move fast enough to escape. The council decided that the station would be lost, and they began calculating how many research archives could be saved if they sent evacuation ships. But before the council could finish their calculations, a message arrived from the human fleet. Captain Jake Morrison said that humans would help. He sent a convoy of human ships with the fastest engines available. The human pilots flew directly toward the asteroid's path and used their weapons to break it into smaller pieces. The pieces that remained were small enough that the Zenithian station could shoot them down with defensive weapons. The research station was saved, and all the people on it were safe. The Zenithians were amazed. In their long existence spanning millions of years, they had rarely seen other species make such sacrifices for them, without expecting something valuable in return. When the Zenithian delegation thanked the humans, Captain Morrison simply said that people were in danger, and humans could not abandon them. That was the only reason he needed. Then another crisis occurred. A Vex vessel began experiencing catastrophic systems failure in deep space. The damage was so severe that the ship would soon lose all power and freeze in the cold darkness. The Vex crew would die without help. The council looked at the situation and determined that attempting a rescue was too dangerous. No species could reach the dying ship and successfully save it. The decision was made to let the vessel perish. But humans disagreed with this decision. A human strike team volunteered to board the dying Vex ship and attempt a rescue. The task was incredibly dangerous. The human soldiers had to fly through the cold darkness of space in special suits. They had to cut through the Vex ship's hull to enter it. They had to navigate through systems that were failing all around them. Several human soldiers could have been killed at any moment. Yet the humans succeeded. They retrieved the Vex consciousness archives, the most important data and memories of the Vex civilization. They brought these archives back to safety aboard human vessels. When the rescue mission ended, the Vex were stunned and deeply grateful. The humans had risked their own lives to save something precious to the Vex. Even though the Vex had shown no kindness to humans in the past, Commander Victor Hayes led one of the most important missions of this period. He was a strong man with a scarred face that told stories of countless battles. Victor had served in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years. He was experienced, brave, and willing to take enormous risks for people he cared about. Victor organized a dangerous intelligence-gathering operation deep in Cartho space. He selected a team of 7 humans, the most skilled and brave soldiers available. The mission was to fly into enemy territory, avoid detection, gather information about Cartho military bases and weapons, and return safely with the data. For weeks, Victor and his team operated in hostile space. They flew through asteroid fields to avoid detection by Cartho sensors. They landed on hidden moons and collected intelligence on Cartho activities. They risked their lives every single moment, knowing that if they were discovered, they would certainly be captured or killed. The Cartho had no idea that 7 human soldiers were gathering information about their military operations. They did not understand that humans were willing to endure such hardship and danger to protect others. Victor's team survived on very little food and water. They slept in shifts, always ready for danger. They pushed their human bodies to the absolute limit of what was possible. Finally, after weeks of dangerous work, Victor and his team collected all the information they could find. They returned to human territory with valuable data that showed exactly where the Cartho military bases were located and what weapons the Cartho had available. This information proved invaluable to the Galactic Council's defensive strategies. When Victor and his team returned to the Galactic Council, they became heroes. The Council realized that humans possessed a quality that had been lost among most advanced civilizations. Humans had the ability to sacrifice their own comfort and safety for others. Humans would do difficult and dangerous things simply because those things needed to be done. A young Corvian merchant named Kess had been watching these events carefully. Kess was female and had purple skin and many arms like all Corvians. She had previously dismissed humans as worthless creatures useful only as cheap labor. But as she watched humans sacrifice themselves again and again for other species, Kess began to understand that she had been wrong. Kess decided to study human history and culture. She read about thousands of humans who had fought against impossible odds. She learned about humans who had protected strangers at great personal cost. She read about humans who had never stopped trying to improve things, even when success seemed impossible. The more Kess learned, the more her opinions changed. She began to see that humans possessed something special that most advanced species had lost through their evolution and expansion. Humans still cared about individuals. Humans still valued the lives of other beings. Humans would fight and sacrifice for principle, not just for profit. Kess began talking to other merchants about what she had learned. She shared her new understanding of humanity with Corvian leaders. Slowly, the attitude of the entire Corvian merchant society began to shift. They began to see humans not as tools to be exploited, but as partners deserving of respect. Among the Galactic Council, whispered conversations began happening in the quiet corridors and private chambers. Council members spoke about humans using a new word that had never been used before. The word was threat, but they did not mean it as a military threat. They meant that humans posed a threat to the established order of how galactic society worked. Humans were challenging the cynical calculations that had governed most galactic affairs for thousands of years. The council members realized that if other species began following the human example, if they began sacrificing for each other instead of focusing only on their own interests, everything would change. Some council members feared this change. Others welcomed it. But all of them understood that humans had introduced something new and powerful into the galaxy. Nothing would ever be the same. The human expeditionary fleet approached the contested zone near the Cartho territory with careful precision. The fleet consisted of only 12 ships, a tiny force compared to what other galactic powers usually sent into dangerous space. The largest ship in the fleet was the command vessel, and it carried Captain Jake Morrison in its bridge. The other ships were fighters and support vessels, each one equipped with the best technology that Earth could produce. Yet everyone knew that technology alone would not be enough. The soldiers and crew members of the fleet were well trained. They had practiced their combat maneuvers thousands of times. They understood tactical formations and defensive strategies. Many of them had studied military history, learning from the successes and failures of conflicts that had happened across human civilization. But they were also nervous. They knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Cartho had weapons that were far more advanced and destructive than anything humans possessed. Jake stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked out at the stars. Lieutenant Emma Walsh stood beside him. Emma was his tactical officer, a brilliant woman with red hair and sharp blue eyes. She had studied at the top military academies on Earth and had proven herself in countless training exercises. Emma was one of the finest military minds that humanity had produced. Jake turned to Emma and spoke quietly. He said that they had arrived at the contested zone and soon the real test would begin. He asked Emma if she had any concerns about their position or their strategy. Emma did not hesitate. She said that their situation was not ideal, but she had studied the Cartho attack patterns carefully. She believed she had discovered something important about how the Cartho thought and how they planned their attacks. Emma explained her analysis to Jake. She said that the Cartho were powerful and aggressive, but they were also predictable in many ways. Their military tactics followed established patterns that had worked for them in the past. The Cartho believed that raw power and direct assault were the best methods of warfare. They did not expect enemies to think in new ways or to use unexpected tactics against them. Emma believed that this predictability could be their advantage. Before Emma could explain more, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Sensors detected multiple Cartho vessels approaching their position. The attack was beginning. The Cartho fleet came out of hyperspace with tremendous speed, their massive warships cutting through the darkness of space like weapons of destruction. The Cartho were a race of large creatures with tough, scaled skin and powerful bodies. They were warriors by nature, and their entire civilization was built on conquest and domination. The lead Cartho ship began broadcasting a message across all communication channels. The Cartho commander, a being of immense size and obvious power, spoke in a deep voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the human ships. He told the humans that their fleet was insignificant. The Cartho had destroyed far greater forces. The humans should surrender now, or they would be destroyed and their species would become slaves to the Cartho Empire. Jake did not respond with fear. Instead, he turned to his communications officer and ordered him to send a return message. Jake recorded a personal message to the Cartho commander. In the message, Jake spoke calmly but with absolute confidence. He said that humanity would not surrender. Humans would defend the settlement below them with everything they had. Jake told the Cartho that they were about to learn what it meant to face an enemy that would not break, no matter how powerful the Cartho seemed. The Cartho commander found this response entertaining. He laughed and the sound echoed through the communication channels. He ordered his fleet to destroy the human ships and capture the settlement. The attack began with tremendous force. Cartho weapons unleashed devastating energy blasts that lit up the space around the human fleet. But something unexpected happened next. The human ships did not scatter in panic like the Cartho had expected. Instead, they began moving in complex patterns that seemed almost chaotic to the Cartho targeting systems. Emma Walsh had designed these patterns carefully, based on her study of Cartho combat tactics. The human ships flew in precise choreography, where each vessel moved in a way that seemed random, but was actually perfectly coordinated with every other ship in the fleet. The Cartho weapons, which had been programmed to target predictable enemy movements, found it nearly impossible to lock onto the human ships. The targeting systems would calculate where a human ship was going, but by the time the weapons reached that location, the human vessel had already moved somewhere else. The pattern of movement was not logical according to traditional military thinking. but it was devastatingly effective. Emma coordinated the movement of all 12 human ships from the bridge of the command vessel. She spoke rapid commands that sent the pilots into new formations. The human pilots trusted her completely. They knew that Emma's tactics, though unconventional, were designed to keep them alive. Pilot after pilot followed her instructions, trusting that the pattern they were flying would protect them. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Emma also employed a second tactical advantage that the Cartho had not anticipated. She ordered the human communications officer to broadcast messages of defiance and courage across all channels. The messages were directed at the Cartho, but they were also meant for the civilian population in the settlement that humans were defending. The broadcast declared that humans would not yield, humans would fight, humans would protect those who could not protect themselves. These messages had a powerful psychological effect. The Cartho were accustomed to enemies who fought for territory or resources or survival. They understood conquest and domination, but they did not understand an enemy that fought with such fierce determination for no purpose except to protect others. The psychological pressure of facing such an enemy began to affect the Cartho commanders. The first breakthrough came when Emma identified a pattern in the Cartho communication signals. She realized that the Cartho were coordinating their attacks by sending regular signals between their different ships. By studying these signals carefully, Emma could actually predict the Cartho movement several seconds in advance. She shared this information with the human pilots, and suddenly, the humans were no longer reacting to Cartho attacks. They were anticipating them. A human fighter pilot named Marcus drove his ship directly toward one of the large Cartho battleships. The maneuver seemed suicidal. The Cartho weapons opened fire with everything they had. But Marcus had timed his approach perfectly, based on Emma's predictions of Cartho movements. He flew between the energy blasts and reached the battleship's hull. He fired weapons specifically designed to disable ship systems rather than destroy them. The Cartho battleship's engines failed, and the massive vessel began to drift without power. The human fleet continued to adapt and adjust their tactics as the battle progressed. When one strategy became less effective, Emma immediately developed a new one. The human pilots became faster and smarter as they learned from each exchange with the Cartho. Slowly, the tide of the battle began to turn in humanity's favor. After hours of intense combat, something miraculous happened. The human fleet disabled 3 Cartho battleships without losing a single human vessel. The Cartho commander, stunned by this development, made the decision to retreat. His fleet pulled back from the contested zone and disappeared into hyperspace. The settlement below was saved. The humans had won. As the battle ended, silence fell across the human fleet. The soldiers and crew members could hardly believe what they had accomplished. They had faced an enemy that was supposed to be far superior in every way. They had won through ingenuity, courage, and clever thinking. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and looked at Emma Walsh. She was exhausted but smiling. Jake told her that they had just changed everything. Humanity was no longer a joke to anyone. The large gathering hall of the Galactic Council was filled with the sounds of different languages and the quiet hum of advanced technology. Representatives from across the universe sat in specially designed seats that adjusted to their individual body types. Some floated in liquid-filled spheres, others stood on 6 legs, and a few hovered silently above their designated spaces. In the center of this massive chamber, Captain Jake Morrison stood alone, waiting to present humanity's first official proposal to the galactic community. Jake Morrison was a tall human with dark hair and a strong jaw. He had trained for this moment his entire life. He wore the blue uniform of the Earth Defense Force with pride, but he could feel the weight of everyone's stare. The humans had only joined the Galactic Council 3 years ago, and most species still did not take them seriously. Jake knew he had to prove that humanity deserved a seat at this table. The Vex representative spoke first. His name was Coordinator Velthus, and he was a being made entirely of silicon. He did not have a face like humans did, but his voice came through a speaker attached to his main body structure. Velthus made a sound that resembled a laugh. His words were cruel but delivered calmly. He said that humans were nothing more than biological containers of inefficiency. Their bodies broke down quickly. Their brains were limited compared to the advanced minds of the Vex. He wondered why the Council had even allowed such a primitive species to join their ranks. The Corvian merchants sat together in a group. They were large creatures with purple skin and many arms. These beings cared only about profit and resources. Their leader, a merchant named Kessator, had already calculated the value of Earth. He saw it as a potential mining colony. The metals in Earth's crust would be useful. The human labor would be cheap. That was all humans were to the Corvians. They were tools to be used. Even the Zenithians, who were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful and thoughtful, could not hide their disappointment. The Zenithians were beings of pure energy contained in crystalline forms. They had existed for millions of years and had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. The leader of the Zenithian delegation, philosopher Xandor, spoke with a soft voice that echoed through the chamber. He said that humans had potential, perhaps, but they were so new to space travel, so young as a species. He compared them to children playing with dangerous toys. The Zenithians believed it would take at least 10,000 years before humans could truly contribute to galactic society. Jake felt the sting of these words, but he kept his expression calm. He had expected this reaction. He stood straight and tall as he activated the holographic display. Images of Earth appeared above the council floor, showing the blue oceans, the green continents, and the cities full of human life. He began his presentation. Jake spoke about humanity's strengths. He talked about how humans had overcome nearly impossible challenges on their own planet. Humans had survived diseases, wars, natural disasters, and countless other threats, yet they always found ways to rebuild and improve. He explained that humans had a unique ability to adapt to any situation. They could work together even when they disagreed. They could create solutions to problems that seemed impossible. He told the council about human courage and determination. Humans were willing to face danger to protect those they loved. They would sacrifice their own safety for the good of others. These qualities, Jake believed, made humans valuable members of the galactic community. He proposed that humanity should be allowed to take an active role in protecting galactic security. He suggested that human soldiers and pilots could help defend against the threats that existed in the outer regions of space. The council listened to Jake's entire presentation without interruption. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then, a representative from the Morpheus Collective, a strange being with multiple eyes and a body that seemed to shift and change shape, actually laughed out loud. The sound was harsh and mocking. This being, whose name was Chancellor Morpheus, said that humans were welcome to try, but he warned that they should not expect serious consideration or important assignments. Humans, he said, were too weak and too unreliable to handle real galactic responsibilities. Not everyone in the chamber felt the same way, however. Ambassador Lisa Douglas, Earth's representative to the council, had been watching and listening carefully to every word. She did not show any anger or sadness. Instead, she studied each council member with intelligent eyes. She noticed the small ways they looked at each other, the subtle signals that showed division and disagreement among them. She saw their weaknesses, the small fears and insecurities that even advanced beings possessed. Lisa was a woman with sharp features and intelligent brown eyes. She had gray streaks in her dark hair that showed her wisdom and experience. She had worked in diplomacy for 30 years before coming to the Galactic Council. She knew how to read people and how to understand what they really meant beneath their words. Jake looked at Lisa across the chamber. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that moment, they understood each other completely. Words were not necessary. They both knew that humanity would not gain respect through presentations or proposals. Respect would come only through action. They would have to prove themselves through deeds, not words. After the council meeting ended, Lisa and Jake met in a private chamber. The room was small and quiet, designed for confidential conversations. Lisa told Jake that their initial proposal would likely be rejected. The council would not give humans any important assignments, she explained. They would try to keep humanity on the sidelines, away from any real responsibility. But then Lisa smiled. She told Jake that the council's rejection might be exactly what they needed. She had been studying the situation in the Outer Rim, the dangerous region of space that existed beyond the council's direct control. The Cartho, a species known for their violent nature and aggressive expansion, had been attacking colonies in that region for months. Multiple settlements had been destroyed. Entire populations had been killed or enslaved. The council had been trying to contain the Cartho threat, but they were using only minimal forces. Each council member was more interested in protecting their own territory than in truly solving the problem. They were hoping that the Cartho would eventually tire of the conflict or turn their attention elsewhere. It was a strategy of avoidance, not of true defense. Lisa explained to Jake that she would propose something different. She would suggest that humanity volunteer to take the forward position in the outer rim. Humans would defend the contested territory and hold the line against the Cartho. The council would accept this proposal immediately, she predicted. They would see it as a perfect opportunity to use humans as expendable shields, to let humans die in a fight that was not truly humanity's fight. But Lisa had a different idea in mind. She believed that if humans could prove themselves capable in the outer rim, if they could show the galaxy that they were stronger and smarter than anyone thought, everything would change. Humanity would earn respect through blood and sacrifice and clever thinking. They would show the universe that humans were not weak creatures to be mocked. Jake listened carefully to Lisa's plan. He understood what she was really saying. Humanity would be walking into a trap, but it would be a trap that humans could turn to their advantage. They would take the assignment that the council expected would be humanity's final defeat, and they would transform it into humanity's greatest victory. Jake nodded slowly. He was afraid, but he was also excited. This was what he had trained for. This was the moment when humanity would prove itself to the galaxy. He and Lisa began to plan, making detailed strategies for how they would approach the Cartho threat with different tactics and new ideas. The Galactic Council had made a terrible mistake in underestimating humanity. They had no idea what they had set in motion when they laughed at Jake Morrison. They had no understanding of what would happen when humans were given the chance to show their true strength. The joke was about to become something far more serious and far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted.